Hi everybody, meteorologist Joe Cioffi here on this Monday evening as we prepare for what's going to be some active weather over parts of the Northeast and also for the Great Lakes as well. And we're going to take a look at also what's going on across the pond as England had and Scotland and Ireland got hit with a lot of snow over the weekend, and some more could be coming with another weather system. So we're going to give a good look at that. And in the meantime, we're also going to look at our weather pattern going forward, because I think we're going to continue to see an active weather pattern here in the eastern part of the U.S., particularly the Northeast into the Mid-Atlantic, with shots of cold air and opportunities for snow along the way for the next 7 days at least. And in fact, when we look at the long range, I kind of stuck a peek at the new run and some of the older runs that we were looking at. A few people, a few of you snow lovers and winter weather lovers were kind of getting bent out of shape over a couple of runs, suggesting a little bit of ridging here in the east. But the overall scheme of the pattern is not really that much different down the road. There'll always be some minor adjusting. But I would just tell you that from my own experience that this is what we've seen so far. What we're trying to now get clues on is whether this is going to be something that is going to be a recurring pattern in the wintertime, or was it just something that pops up for one shot for a couple of weeks and then gone. So a lot of times in those instances, you get weather models in the long range that try to do something different and then ultimately wind up going back to whatever that original pattern was. We saw that happen a lot of times last winter, and I'm starting to wonder whether it's the case here, where we are going to see, weather models occasionally will throw up a bit of a hiccup into some respects. You also have to look a little deeper sometimes into what is actually being thrown up there literally and what it actually means in reality, because of the wide variations that you do get in the long range. Oftentimes, you'll see something that looks a little different, and then as we get closer and closer to time, the model adjusts, and goes back to looking like something that it had originally. So just bear that in mind, so this way you don't drive yourself into an emotional frenzy because you think that the winter is over just as it's getting started. Now here's a look at some of the warnings and advisories that are up tonight across much of upstate New York and the northern half of New England. We have winter storm warnings up for tonight and Tuesday into Tuesday night. Some of these areas here in the winter storm warning area will probably wind up with 6 to 12 inches of snow, I think, with lesser amounts, of course, in the bluer advisory areas that extend a little further to the south, not quite down to the coastal areas, obviously. We also have winter storm warnings up for the east shores of Lake Michigan because of some lake effect that's going to be taking place there, and also on the south shore of parts of Lake Superior, with advisories in other areas of Michigan here. You can see the bands where they've been put up. Some of this has to do with the track of the surface low that's going by now, and some of this has to do with lake effect. Dry conditions across the middle Mississippi Valley west of the Southern Plains, and that has brought up some red flag warnings with the, because of the dry conditions. And then out in the west, because of that big ridge in the west, what do you got? You got fog, and that is going to be the issue while that upper high remains out in the west. And of course, we know that that upper high in the west is something that is a positive when it comes to winter weather conditions in the east. I'm going to punch up the regional radar here of the Northeast, and there we go. So we're starting to see some snow coming into western New York and into eastern Ohio. A little bit of snow shower activity aloft into eastern Pennsylvania. I don't think that, at least for my neck of the woods, that there's going to be any problem with this, other than that there might be a couple of snow showers in the northwestern counties of New Jersey, northeastern Pennsylvania, and then on up into the Hudson Valley and northern Connecticut overnight. But we're going to see warm air come up and bring temperatures up into the 40s to near 50 in some places briefly on Tuesday, before the next shot of cold air moves on down. So I think what we'll do now is I'm going to bring up the GFS And I'm going to just tell you, just as a as we start, try and think back to last week with respect to the fact that we had models adjusting and changing, and also try to remember that we had those errors of the models over the last number of weeks with systems along the East Coast that wound up being further west. But so just remember that with that trend may still be in play. My rule on these things is to kind of always, stick with the idea of that trend until you see something that changes it. And maybe this time around it will change, but we don't know that yet. So here's the situation now with this lead low that's in central Indiana. You can see the snow that the model indicates across southern Michigan, back to northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, and then of course you have more activity up further to the north. Now that low is going to wind up going into western New York and then intensifying. What will probably happen is a new center will form somewhere over Long Island during the day on Tuesday, and you can see the rain showers down to the coast, and then it'll intensify as that low heads up toward Maine, and you get some pretty hefty snows that occur west and north of the center. But then the lake effect machine turns on here across New York State later Tuesday and Tuesday night, and we get a shot of very cold air that we've been has been pretty well advertised going into Wednesday. Now there's more energy upstream, so that next energy is already dropping southeastward. By Wednesday afternoon and evening, you've got a low in western Illinois with some snow in Wisconsin and over into western Michigan that eventually winds up going into Ohio and western Pennsylvania by Wednesday evening. That low is going to have a tough time because of the fact that to the northeast you have this deep storm here. So there's not really a whole lot of room. The energy with this is going to wind up getting squashed to some degree. So the thing we'll have to pay attention to is whether this system can somehow hold together a bit longer. And you can see there's light snows being indicated for late Wednesday night, Thursday morning across Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And you could barely pick out, there's a weak low here, probably along the New Jersey coast. But again, that strong storm to the north with pressures down in the 960s leaves only a limited amount of room. Now, another system is coming down, and that is heading southeastward. We're going to probably see this eventually shift to the east as another deep trough tries to sharpen up in the eastern part of the United States. And that, I think, when I'll show you the upper air, that is one of these things where we're going to watch closely. Low pressure starts to develop near the Carolinas. You only have a limited amount of moisture, and then it gets going Friday night into Saturday. Now, the day run made it a very close call for the coastal areas. This one's a little bit further to the east, but I think it's still within the margin of error, so we're going to have to pay attention here that we could wind up with something that's further northwest. That has been the trend. It'll depend on the trough and how it sharpens up. And by the way, at this point, we're starting to see the ridge in the west break down a bit, so a little bit of snow gets into the northern Rockies here toward the end of the week and into the weekend, and you start to see a weather system starting to come into the Pacific Northwest. Here's another low and cold front that extends southward, ridge along the East Coast, but a weak one at best, so you might have some moderation for a day or so, and then the front tries to come through, and you do have some kind of wave here on the front. I will tell you that the European did much more with this, building much more of a high in eastern Canada, and had a much stronger system in the southern part of the jet stream for early next week. So I think that holds a possibility as well. So you want to count 3 chances for snow over the next 7 or 8 days. I think that's reasonable. And of course, we have the action that's going to be happening tonight. Now, let's go to the upper air here, and we'll go back to the beginning. And you can see this is our energy here for today. You have the whole trough just basically rotating around in the north. It's actually, when you look at it, it isn't that different of what we just went through in terms of the northern part of the jet stream coming around. It's just that we don't have a southern feature like we did the last time, so it's all really in the north. And because this system is not digging far enough south, it takes a surface low north of New York City and in through upstate New York. This is something that the GFS was fairly consistent on and the European was not. Now, that upper trough, really, you notice it doesn't really get out of the way. Part of it gets out of the way and part of it rotates back, so that at the end of the week, you can barely find the lead system, by the way, for Thursday. It's in here. So you hear it, you see it here. This indentation in the fall, actually you can barely see it. You can barely find it here coming into western Pennsylvania and West Virginia. It just kind of gets lost because of that deep upper low to the northeast. But as we head into Friday, that upper low starts to pull out and you have another round of energy coming down in the northern stream. And this time you do have a stronger feature swinging around further south. And you can see it here by Thursday night, that kind of L shape on the upper winds going down through Kansas and Oklahoma and then turning eastward across Arkansas and Tennessee. So there's a little shortwave trough here, and the north is getting involved. And you'll notice that as we move to later Friday and Friday night, that trough begins to sharpen and go negative. Now, the question is whether the southern part of that trough is going to stay separate or is it going to phase with the north. And this is what we just went through this past Saturday, where we wound up actually at the last minute seeing the models phasing it just enough. And I think we need to leave open the possibility that that could very well happen again. Then, after that goes by, a little bit of a flat ridge here in the east, but still, you're close enough with what's going on in Canada. Canada still remains kind of cold and cyclonic in flow, that as we move through the early part of next week, you start to see that ridge trying to pop up again in the west with some troughing in the east, at least enough to keep things rather chilly, certainly for the northeast. And then eventually, as we move deeper into the long range, you start to get, this deeper trough that drops in. You see it there? Drops in. Now, and you also see a big ridge starting to pop up in the western states. So let's go wider. One of the things we're going to watch for too is the fact that where this trough winds up dropping in. Does it drop in at 80 degrees west, 85, or around 90? You can see here that it's dropping initially, at least. It seems to drop a little bit to the left, but not too far. But the most important thing in my mind is the fact that you're going to have this big upper high back again developing in the Pacific Northwest. That's going to cause our Pacific North America index to spike up again to a very high reading, and it's going to also force the Eastern Pacific Oscillation, the EPO, to get very negative, and that is going to favor cold air in the Northeast. You're not going to have to worry about any kind of blocking. That doesn't play into this equation really, but if you look here in terms of the signature, this really does look like what we had late last week, in that we've got this low that's sitting south of the Aleutians and troughing down to Hawaii, which forces this big ridge to build up in the west, which forces the deep trough in the east. So it seems to me that the pattern really just kind of wants to get back to what we've just gotten into after this sort of brief, let's call it a brief relaxation or a brief reorganization. And it really isn't that much of a relaxation or a reorganization. It's just kind of just moving the chess pieces around to get them back to where they were originally. So if you're into winter weather and cold is your thing, I think you can be reasonably calm about the fact that we're going to hold on to this pattern for a while. Now let's go take a look at what's happening across in Europe, because we've got this deep trough that's come in to Western Europe, and that is yet going to be followed by another very deep trough upper low that's going to move up north of near Scotland and eventually make its way also into Western Europe as we go through this week. So what this means in terms of the actual day-to-day weather, we'll look at this. Now we've just seen our storm that produced the snow over the weekend move up into Western Europe. Not too much happening over the British Isles tonight. Actually, a little bit of rain and maybe some higher terrain snow in Scotland on Tuesday. But then once that next big upper low comes into play, you see another shot of cold air and snow over all of Ireland, most of England. Again, this is going to be for Wednesday of this week. And then that storm kind of plays on through, winds itself down. You start to get some lighter precip here until we get into next weekend, and then it looks like, you know, it warms up a bit and we get into some rain. But we are going to see some more wintertime weather coming into the British Isles with this as the week goes on. You guys, I know, had a pretty rough few days there. Some snow amounts up in the 20 to 30 centimeter range, and gust winds that in some places were gusting to hurricane force. That was quite, for me anyway, you know, starting to pay attention to these things for the first time. It is, you know, been quite the learning experience. Here's your 10-day snowfall, front end loaded, and, you know, more snows for England and Ireland, and in the fuchsia areas we're talking about 12 centimeters or higher in pockets in Wales, and then on up northward, and of course onto near Scotland. A lot of snow in Germany, eastern France, the Alps, of course. You know, this is getting to that time of year. You know, they just keep putting the snow amounts down as the snow cover across Europe continues to expand fairly rapidly. Back home in the Northeast, what do we expect with this weather system? Well, this is the 10-day snowfall, so I think we'll just roll it back and take you out through, let's go into Thursday. And here you have Thursday's snows. This is all, you know, a lot of this is, some of this is from the actual low going by. Some of this is lake effect. So I think some of the lake effect areas are going to do very well. And of course the ski areas in New York State and Vermont and New Hampshire, basically north of I-90, are going to do quite well as the interior areas of Maine. With the way that low is tracking, not all of Maine is going to do well with this. And in terms of these coastal systems, it doesn't really produce very much in terms of snow. When we look at the 24-hour snowfall, if we want to go to the next event, in fact, you know what, I can at least break this down for you. Let's go to the first 24-hour period. So this is between now and tomorrow afternoon, and there's how much snow is predicted in the next less than 24 hours. And then we can go out to the next 24 hours, you know, additional couple of inches. And when we go out to the next 24 hours, so this is through Thursday afternoon, you can see from the weak weather system some 4-inch, 2 to 4-inch snow amounts over Ohio, southern Michigan, over into southwestern PA. Lesser amounts as you go to the east because the model is forecasting that low to be on the weak side. And we'll go to 96 hours and you start to see some snows again back through parts of, mostly this is light stuff anyway. Let's go to the Great Lakes, which will be the other area of interest with regards to snowfall. So we can start with the first 24-hour period. So whatever's already been put down doesn't count. So another couple of inches in spots here. We'll go out to 48 hours. So this is ending midday Wednesday. So there's your snowfall for the 24-hour period from midday Tuesday to midday Wednesday, a couple of inches, probably a little bit more in some lake effect areas in Michigan. And now you got that low, the next low that drops southeastward. So you start to see these amounts here of 3-4 inches in southern Michigan and through a good chunk of Ohio, except the southeast. So you know what? I'm a winter weather lover. So and plus the fact that I really like the forecasting part of this. So I'm kind of excited about the pattern going forward. It's going to have a number of opportunities, and you know what? Not all of them are going to work out. Some of them are, some of them aren't. One of the takeaways I would say from this weekend too is the fact that we had the snowfall kind of flip in both directions. The models were not very good with this at all. You know, most of the models were forecasting larger snow amounts for the coast and for central New Jersey southward, with not that much north of there into the Hudson Valley and very little in northeastern Pennsylvania. What wound up happening was that it flipped on both ends. The eastern areas where I am, for example, I got 2.5 inches. The western areas wound up being much further west into eastern Pennsylvania, and some parts of eastern Pennsylvania wound up with 6 to 8 inches, and actually a good chunk of eastern Pennsylvania wound up with 6 to 8 inches. And also the areas to the north in the Hudson Valley and into Connecticut, which actually Connecticut was the one spot where it probably worked out, but there were general snowfalls of 3, 4, 5, and even some 6 and isolated 7-inch snow amounts that occurred in areas to the north, northeast, and northwest. So this was, a lot of times in active winters, one of the things that I've always, kept in the back of my mind, that in active winters, it finds a way to snow. It just finds a way. And even when it looks like it's not going to happen, if you've got a general setup that might be even remotely favorable, if it wants to snow, it'll find a way to do it. And I think that is what we saw on Saturday in a lot of places. So let's keep that in mind going forward, because that might be a sign that the winter is going to be a very interesting one for much of the Northeast. All right, so let me give everybody a very big hello. I hope you had a great weekend. If you were looking for snow where you were, I hope you got at least something. And thank you, MJM Tree Service and Maintenance. All is good on my end, and hope everything is great on your end. A lot of the landscapers, by the way, have at least up down where I am, because the leaves didn't come down the way they were supposed to. They're still up on the trees in some places, although brown. They haven't been able to finish their fall cleanups. Usually they have their fall cleanups done right around or just to the end of Thanksgiving. They're still at it. So the threats for snow are important now, because they can't get the cleanups finished if there's snow on the ground. So they want actually a little bit of a break before they go into plowing mode. Hi to David Schwartz, Stephen Franco, always smiling. Hey, Southside Boxing, you haven't been on in a while. You got some snow up your way? I see. That's great. I'd be curious as to how much you got and what it's doing with your with traveling up where you are. Southside Boxing is on the other side of the world for us, relatively speaking. He participated in those snowy, cold conditions that occurred in the British Isles. Jason Schaefer, analyzing any freezing drizzle potential for western New Jersey and inland Connecticut. I don't know. I'm not too concerned about it. I think the warming happens too quickly, and maybe, I suppose it's not impossible, but I just think the temperatures are going to probably rise a little bit too fast. Plus, a lot of the precip may wind up being to the north, so I don't know how much drizzle you're going to be able to get out of this. MJM Tree Service again, people, well, the B word, about the winter, get a grip. I'm one of the biggest winter weather lovers in the world. This winter has been better than last winter for most of us in our region. Well, it certainly has gotten to an early start, and that is definite. David Schwartz, what do I make of the current PNA, NAO, EPO, WPO? Okay, let's forget the NAO, because you know what? The NAO to me is only relevant when I need it to be. Okay, in other words, if I need the NAO to be negative to get it for a certain situation, I don't think we need it to be negative as far as winter weather is concerned. One of the things about the PNA and the EPO that I liked about today, and looking at the long range, is the fact that even though both of those indices come back to the neutral line and actually go into what would be unfavorable conditions for winter weather in the east, it's only slightly unfavorable, and it's only for a very short period of time, for a couple of days, and then they go back to strongly positive for the Pacific North America Index. That's why that upper air ridge we saw pops right back up. The EPO, the Eastern Pacific Oscillation, which I think is much more important than the NAO is, that being negative combined with that PNA is telling us that colder than average temperatures are going to be dominating in the eastern part of the U.S. I think that trend definitely continues. Let's see. Ian Simpson, good Pembrokeshire dangler has been going on all day over the UK. I guess like they call some of these storms like here a southern slider, for example. So I'm thinking that that's what the Pembrokeshire dangler. I guess that's the storm. The low center hangs over Pembrokeshire. I like saying that. And you get precip all day. I'm assuming that that's what it means. But if I'm not, please correct me. Thomas Bullock, another southern snowstorm around Christmas. Well, you know what? If we wind up with a deep trough again, much like we just had, you know, things like to repeat themselves. And by the way, the system that we had that with the snow in the south, you know, a lot of places that got snow are places like San Antonio, Houston, New Orleans. They get snow like once every 10 years or so. You know, things do like to repeat in some fashion when you have a weather pattern like this. So, you know, if we wind up seeing something repeat, don't be shocked. All right, that could very well happen. And yeah, well, you know what? If you shoot that PNA up, Thomas Bullock, the way it is with the negative EPO, if you get the NAO involved, which it may not this time around, we might not have the NAO. The NAO will be positive, but again, the NAO to me is the least important of the equation, and it's not necessary in order to have winter weather. Please remember, David Schwartz, that winters of 13-14 and 14-15, which were pretty nasty cold winters in the Northeast and Great Lakes and Mid-Atlantic state. Well, maybe not so much the Great Lakes for 14-15, but certainly for the Northeast. That was, both those winters were done with an NAO that was positive for most of the time. So, you know, don't put. I've said that the NAO is vastly overstated in importance. Dusty Rose, yeah. You are, with the ridge in the west the way it is, it's going to be really hard pressed for you to see any snow out your way over the next couple of weeks, because even though the ridge does break down, it doesn't break down enough to bring colder air. I mean, maybe it'll bring cooler air certainly, but or a little bit of cold air, but the storms are not going to be able to move your way. They're going to be dropping down out of Canada rather than coming in across the Pacific. I wonder whether that part of the equation may change as we get into January, much like it did last year with when suddenly the southern part of the jet opened up and brought all those storms into California. Maybe that'll happen with the La Nina out there. It's possible that that could happen again. I don't know. I'm just kind of speculating. You know, free stream of consciousness, speculating. Southside says Scotland had a bit more than most. The Midlands have had a bit, not so much down south for us. I did see that Heathrow was having ice problems, so your temperatures certainly got cold enough to cause some icing conditions down in the southern part of England. So, you know, very, very exciting weather times, I think, going forward. Sometimes I like the fact that there's a lot to look at and a lot of puzzle pieces running around. So whether all those puzzle pieces come together or not down the road remain to be seen, but certainly the models are offering us a lot of possibilities when it comes to cold and snow going forward. So we'll leave it at that at this point. You can read more about all this on meteorologistjoecioffi.com, so you can check out the latest posts there. There's a link on the top of my channel page here you can get to, along with right to Facebook, Google+, and Twitter. And if you're new to my YouTube channel, welcome. It's great to have you here. Our subscribership has been growing nicely. And please, if you would, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and add on to those numbers. It's free to subscribe. You get notified when new live streams and videos come out. Usually do at least one live stream a day, and sometimes when the weather is very active, I do a couple of live streams. Thank you, Always Smiling. I really appreciate that. And Stephen Franco, my pal, I appreciate that as well. Facebook live stream tonight at roughly probably starting sometime between 7:30 and 8 o'clock. It'll be the Joe Cioffi, Joe Rayo show. My colleague Joe Rayo will be joining me, so we'll be on Facebook. I like to call it the Joe and Joe Show. So we'll take a look at some, we'll go through the weather again and take a look maybe at some other new things that may have popped up between now and then. Bobcat, why do they make predictions as far as snow for 2 weeks into the forecast? Because it seems things change on a daily basis and they can be totally wrong, so why bother? Okay, let me just clarify. At least as far as I'm concerned, what I do. I'm showing you the map of what the model does, and I'm not necessarily agreeing with it or disagreeing with it. Sometimes I will openly disagree. Sometimes I might, lean to the idea that it'll be close. I don't think the model snow projections should be used with any kind of specific forecast, but rather a better way to use the tool in the long range. You might use it in the short range, but in the long range, you could use it as a tool as reflecting areas that are more likely to see snow, and it's also a reflection of how where the troughs and ridges are. If you look at a sequence of the snow cover, you can kind of pick out easily where the ridges and troughs are. Now, with respect to specific forecasts, in terms of myself, one of the things I do and have always tried to do is that I usually don't put up an early forecast snow call until we're about inside 72 hours of start time. I think that's a reasonable time to make a projection, and it should be taken as that, an early call, and that it's going to adjust in one way or another. If someone views that as a 72-hour snow forecast as absolute, I don't think that they have a good understanding of what weather is like, weather forecasting is like. Weather and meteorology, it's a fluid science. I know some people might say it's not an exact science. That's not. I kind of say it differently. I think it's a fluid science. It's about the forecasting of change, and it's also about the trying to forecast the change of the change. And it's a very difficult thing to do. So I think it's reasonable for somebody to put out a forecast, say, inside 72 hours. I would also be very careful, by the way, when you use some of these weather apps. Those are all model driven. There is no human interaction in any of those weather apps. That's all done by, models. The GFS model is basically plugged in into a weather map app format to spit out an icon and a temperature and a forecast. And every 6 hours, if it changes for one particular for any particular area in the long range, the app's going to change. So you're going to see, 6 hours, one it'll have snow, 6 hours later it'll have rain, 6 hours later it'll have sunshine. I don't think that's useful. So understand the fact that apps are computer driven. I know my app is not. That's me. You're getting my stuff. I'm the human. I'm interacting. So that's a whole different story. Andrew Wells, it's still too early to talk about a white Christmas. Let's see how the pattern evolves. And same for Ronnie Abramowitz. Too early to know whether that's going to be the case. Thomas Bullock, the NAO is overrated. It is not necessary for cold and snow. It might be necessary if you want a blockbuster storm like the Boxing Day blizzard, the blizzard of '78, the January blizzard in '96. Those storms all came with negative NAOs, and those were all two-day events, okay, as opposed to 12 to 18-hour events. So you want the blocking there if you're looking at some kind of blockbuster, but you don't need it if you're in a pattern like we're in now, where we've got these weather systems moving along and cold air in the equation, and they are you get the moisture to come through when we have cold air, and it's everything moves along, so you don't have a situation where a storm is slowing down and stalling, but you could still get some heavy snows in cases like that. You certainly could get 1 foot plus snows if you've got the right setup and a deep enough system. If you've got a good southern stream shortwave that comes out, or a powerhouse in the north that comes out and blows up right in your backyard, yeah, there have been a number of cases like that. Those storms don't last more than 12 to 18 hours, but they do the job. But you're not going to get a blockbuster unless you get that negative NAO. But again, in terms of just a general wintry type pattern, you don't need it. And again, once again with the white Christmas, way too early. It's the 11th. The pattern, I think, will look favorable, whether it happens or not. I'm sure some areas are going to have a white Christmas in the Northeast and in the Great Lakes, but I'm talking about maybe the easy areas to forecast there, in the areas that have with lake effect, assuming that we have the pattern holding. As to other areas that are not dependent on lake effect, that's going to be a different story, and we're going to just have to wait till we get closer into the short range so we can get a better feel of what's going on. Gary King's blank. Whatever the cosmic rays higher last month, more clouds, precipitation most likely occur compared to the recent past, but mostly snow, I am betting. All right, well, let's see if that matches up with the pattern. I'm not really too familiar with what you're speaking of, but let's see what happens. And by the way, I'll leave you with this: those who follow the Madden-Julian oscillation, and what that is that just in simplest terms, because I really don't understand it. When I look at the chart, I have a tough time reading it. You have a good evening too, Mirtha. The Madden-Julian oscillation basically looks at tropical activity, and there seems to be some correlation with tropical activity in the far west Pacific and on over into the Indian Ocean, and what phase that activity is in and how it impacts the weather across and the upper pattern across North America. And there are 8 phases of that, and we are going into, apparently it's forecast to go into phases 7, 8, and 1. It's like 1 through 8, but then it kind of goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and when it gets to 6 and 7, it goes to 8, and then to 1 and 2. So when it's in phases 7, 8, I think it's 7, 8, 1, 2, that is the phase that favors cold and snowy weather in the eastern part of the United States, and it looks like we're going to be going into that as we approach Christmas, maybe the week before, and then lasting through Christmas and a bit beyond that. So it'll be interesting to see that. It'll be interesting to see whether it plays out. Thomas Bullock, yes, a fluid science. It's a science of change, and it's also a science where we try to forecast the change of the change. Because my view is, the laws of energy, the laws of thermodynamics, water always freezes at 32 and change, and so on. Those things don't change. But we know that. So that we know, and that those things are given. It's the fact that we're looking at something that's constantly changing from moment to moment, and we're trying to predict that change. That's what meteorology is. That's why I call it a fluid science. And I must go, because if I don't make it on time for my live TV hit in about 20 minutes, then I will be fluid out of here. So everybody have a great rest of your evening and a great Tuesday coming up. We'll see you tomorrow night at about 6 o'clock Eastern Time.